And I wanted to ask you about the compensatory selections. Um, the Niners have 7 compensatory selections, and it seems like Parag Marathe and John Lynch have kind of perfected the equation of how there's an equation to how they dole out these compensatory selections. And the 49ers have figured out a way to operate in and around it and to kind of maximize it. You've watched it from afar. What do you think of it? Seems like they're very much on the cutting edge of understanding which free agents to let go, which free agents to pick up, and they're very disciplined as far as not necessarily signing free agents that have, where it's going to hurt their equation as far as draft pick compensation, but guys that don't fall under the category and they can somehow, benefit from it. How do you think they've played that? Because it seems like they're getting better as the years go on.
Yeah, no, they definitely are. Actually, I wrote something for Niners Nation that was published yesterday that was like a full history of all the comp picks they've gotten, where they came from, and it's fascinating to see how, the first couple of years that really wasn't a thing. They didn't really have comp picks. The first one they got, I believe, was 2019 for letting Aaron Lynch walk, which is, in hindsight is, wild to think how much time's passed since Aaron Lynch was, a big part of their plans here in San Francisco. And they ended up taking that. It was a 6th round pick at 212. And they ended up packaging that with Dakota Watson, traded with Denver for the 148th pick in 2019, and ended up taking Dre Greenlaw, who's been a starter for 4 years, who's going to be a starter for a few more years going forward. So like you look at just the first move they made there with one of those comp picks, it already brought back, a good return. And then you look at a guy like Emmanuel Sanders, right? So the Niners gave up the 3 and the 4 to get Emmanuel Sanders when they got him. And you could argue that they got the value in that alone when they almost won a Super Bowl. He was a big part of, the development of guys like Deebo Samuel and really, was the veteran presence that they needed in that locker room. But beyond that, so they signed Emmanuel Sanders. He ends up signing a multi-year deal with New Orleans the offseason after. And the 49ers get the comp pick back in return for him leaving. And that pick was 180 in the 2021 draft. They take Talanoa Hufanga with that pick. So essentially they gave up the 3 and the 4. You get the half season of Emmanuel Sanders, and you get a safety who was an all-pro in his second season in return for letting a guy like that walk, where you're weighing, we have some young guys. They obviously opted to go and draft a guy like Brandon Ayuk rather than paying Emmanuel Sanders. So when you're looking at some of these decisions they're making, even in the moment, because if you remember, there was a lot of people that were upset they didn't bring Sanders back because of the impact he had. 3 years removed from it, I think we can look back and say that was a massive victory for them. They ended up getting a guy on a rookie deal who's been an all-pro caliber talent within the first couple seasons. And they also didn't spend the money there that, for a guy who's basically had a year and a half or so of good football. And, I don't think Sanders is in the league anymore. I think he was with Buffalo, I know, last season, the season prior. But, so they basically have done a really good job of identifying when it's okay to let these guys go and not spend that money. And then they've been able to turn that capital into a big part of their football team moving forward as well. Another one of their comp picks went to that trade to Washington to get Trent Williams. And they ended up using one of the 5th round picks they got for that to get Trent Williams. So if you just go down the history, I don't have the list in front of me. I put it all together a couple nights ago. It's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, it was a really good piece. Everybody needs to go to Niners Nation and check it out, because what Jordan's talking about, nobody really takes the time to flesh these things out. But if you do, you see that there's a methodology at play here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like, just happenstance. It's intentional. They're intentionally trying to pursue fewer players that cost them draft pick compensation, and they're allowing players that do bring them draft pick compensation to sign elsewhere, and they're taking those draft picks and reinvesting in the roster. That being said, do you look at Leonard Floyd, who was a cap casualty? He's not a free agent. He is now, but he's only a free agent because he was a cap casualty, which I believe means that there will not be any kind of draft pick compensation factoring into this. What do you think of Leonard Floyd? The other guy that I really like defensive end wise, as I've taken a look at, kind of a deep dive on these guys, I kind of like this guy at Oklahoma, the Ogbania Okoronkwo, who went to the Rams and I think wound up with the Raiders this last year and had like 5 or 6 sacks in like 500 snaps. And Oronquo to me might be a guy to get on the come. And I've always loved Leonard Floyd. He's just always been expensive. What do you think? Is Floyd an interesting name, or do you look at that as a viable name because of the way the compensation works as far as the bonus picks and the compensatory selections in next year's draft tied to it?
I think that with the Niners right now, the other edge spots really, like, I'm trying to get a read on it, because what it feels like, Larry, and just from what I've heard, like, they really like Drake Jackson, and it's hard to fault them believing in his potential, because I do think he is a player that has a lot of pass rushing traits that are really difficult to teach, that natural bend and just the feel he has for that position. So, I don't get the sense that they're going to splurge at the edge position opposite Bosa. And I don't know what Floyd's market's going to be. I do think he will command a pretty respectable salary that maybe the Niners are hesitant to, fully go in on. And that's kind of where it's really difficult to see where they're going to invest, because they have to fortify that defensive line, whether it's the defensive tackle position, the edge position. And you're not going to be able to do it all through the draft and through these bargain signings. I think they've done a great job with guys like, Amenahue and Willis for these day 3 picks, and kind of maximizing the back end of rookie deals for guys on teams where maybe they haven't been able to get the best out of them. Amenahue's the best example of that, I think, where in Houston, he was a guy that flashed, but with the Niners, he was a legitimate difference maker. I just don't know how sustainable that is. You always want to believe in your pro scouting department and believe in the coaching staff you have. But at the same time, too, you can't just have the 100% hit rate there. And I think eventually you do have to spend. So I would love to see a guy like Leonard Floyd. I actually wrote an article. It was so funny. People were so, upset about it and against it. But I spent a considerable amount of time the other night watching a few Cleveland Browns games, just breaking down, their defensive film. And Jadeveon Clowney is such a controversial name, because you throw that name out there and everybody always says he never lived up to expectations. He's not good. He quits on his team. I saw every single, excuse for why not to bring the guy in. But when I'm thinking about it, the ceiling is still there. Like, he's still an exceptionally talented edge rusher. He's really, really good against the run. Still is one of the more dominant, physical specimens that plays that position in the NFL. The only problem with a guy like that is that he hasn't played a full season in 6 years. Like, at some point he's going to miss a game or two. It seems like you can kind of bank on that. But for me, when I'm thinking about it, if you believe in Drake Jackson as much as you believe in him and you want him to get those developmental reps, I would much rather take a swing at a guy like Clowney, who's shown when he is healthy, he can be a game-wrecking talent, knowing that should he miss time, or you are going to reduce the snap count to make the snaps he gets more efficient, you can then not have it stunt Drake Jackson's growth. So I'm kind of the mindset where if they're going to take a swing on somebody with that, NFL pedigree and that, physical profile, go for a guy like that, because I just don't see how they'd be able to bring in a guy like Floyd and get the developmental reps. It seems like they want to get Drake Jackson, but I also don't know that Drake Jackson's ready to step in right away in year 2 and be a 3-down guy that can be out there on base downs too. So it's a really weird spot, Larry, because if they didn't have Drake Jackson, I would say this is the perfect offseason to just go all in on getting a guy like Leonard Floyd. But I feel like the Niners are going to be more they're going to have more conviction in their scouting of a guy like Jackson and take the bargain approach with whoever they end up getting there.
It's the edge rusher position is really interesting. Amenahue on IG today kind of thanked everybody and said goodbye. So it sounds like he may be moving on. Maybe that's not the case, but Jordan Willis, Amenahue, and Ebicom are all free agents. Of those 3, who's most likely to return in your mind?
I would say probably Willis, because I think Willis is a guy who's really good in his rotational role. I don't think another team is going to be as aggressive in their pursuit of him as they will be after an Amenahue or an Ebicom, but he's really good at what they ask him to do. And I think part of the reason why Drake Jackson was a healthy scratch down the stretch was because Jordan Willis was playing so well that they didn't have enough. They had more defensive linemen than they could roster week to week. So I would say Jordan Willis, if you can keep him in that rotational role on a moderately, team-friendly deal, I think that's a great return. And, that's the problem with having so many of these talented guys on the defensive line. You're not going to be able to keep the group together forever. But a guy like Willis still has good bend, has good power. We saw the difference he made in that game in Green Bay in the playoffs a couple years ago. He has the ability to make those couple plays a game that can really turn the tide in your favor. So I would say for the price and the production, it would be Jordan Willis.
I don't want to see them all go, but I'll say this: I wouldn't be afraid of it. I'm looking at, I did a deep dive last week on all the edge rushers, watching all of them, going back, looking at their stats, looking at their what they weighed and how they tested at the combine. It's a great group. I mean, there's all these guys going in round one, but just after round one, Will McDonald from Iowa State, crazy athlete. I love him. Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, probably a second-round pick. Love him. And then there's more. Zach Harrison was a 5-star guy out of high school for Ohio State. He's starting to look good to me. Derek Hall from Auburn, I think, had a terrific workout in Indy. Byron Young from Tennessee had a great workout in Indy. And then there's just Jose Ramirez from Eastern Michigan is one of my favorites. And, there's others. Ali Gay, Tyrus Wheat, Cade Hall from San Jose State, Brevin Allen, who played at Tiny Campbell, I think is an exciting edge rusher. You were there in Indy. You saw all these guys. What do you like? Who do you want?
It's tough because, like you said, there's a couple of guys that I really like where if the Niners were picking around 60, 59 or 60, wherever their pick would have been had they not made the McCaffrey trade, I think a guy like Foskey would have been fantastic for what they do. More in their range. I really like Isaiah McGuire out of Missouri. He's a guy who I've been trying to watch a bit more. He also has familiarity with Steve Wilkes. Wilkes was a defensive coordinator at Missouri in 2021. So if there is any interest there, the 49ers have an inside track into the kind of person he is, the kind of player he is day to day, which, the more time I do spend at things like the combine, you realize how valuable that kind of thing, those kind of things are beyond just the tape and stuff like that. I really do like Byron Young, but I worry that he is he kind of pushed himself out of where the Niners will be picking unless they're willing to move up and grab a guy like that. I do like Fehoko out of San Jose State. He's another guy, local guy, who definitely caught my eye. The thing with the edge guys is that I don't know that they're going to be able to get a guy who's going to be bona fide, part of their rotation for the full 4 years of their contract in the third round. But I do think they could get a guy who could be who you could develop into that and not have as much pressure with a 5th round pick, with a 6th round pick. So I'm kind of shifting away from the guys you might get at the 99 through 102 picks that they have and sort of looking more towards the back end. Cause to me, that's where it makes a little bit more sense, because I think at the same time, like you said, there's so many good edge rushers in this class, but I would be more inclined to kind of prioritize maybe the offensive line a bit. I think there's a lot of really good players in the secondary in that window. So I'm at the point now where I'm studying a little bit more some of these other guys like Tavius Robinson out of Ole Miss. I really liked. I think he has a great athletic profile, really big. I think he's 6'6", 265, something like that. The Niners met with him formally at the combine, and he's a guy where I think you could get him in the 4th, 5th round and, hopefully develop into, a player that have a prominent role. So as much as there's good talent in the top and in the middle, if that makes sense, I'm kind of shifting towards the back end because I think there's better value there. And then you could allocate those earlier picks towards some of these really talented defensive backs and offensive linemen who I think will be there.